What if I told you that the most powerful food system ever devised by human hands requires almost zero effort after the first year? What if I told you that somewhere deep in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania and Ohio, communities of people have been feeding their families for generations without ever stepping foot inside a garden center, without ever pulling out a credit card to buy seeds every spring, and without ever breaking their backs, tilling new ground when the frost finally lifts? The Amish figured something out that the rest of the modern world was never supposed to know. They cracked the code on a farming philosophy so elegant, so profoundly aligned with the natural world, that once you understand it, you will never look at a grocery store the same way again. While the rest of us have been trapped in an exhausting, expensive annual cycle, buying seeds, buying fertilizers, buying transplants from nurseries that charge a small fortune for something that will die in one season anyway, these quiet and deliberate communities have been harvesting the same plants year after year, decade after decade, from the same ground with nothing more than patience, observation, and a deep reverence for the wisdom of their ancestors. And here is the part that should make you angry. The modern agricultural industry, the seed companies, the big box garden centers, the fertilizer corporations, they profit enormously from your dependency. Every spring, they need you to come back. They need you to feel like gardening is complicated, expensive, and seasonal, because the moment you understand perennial growing, the moment you realize that nature already designed a system where plants come back stronger and more productive every single year without you replanting them, you stop being their customer forever. That is exactly what this video is about. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about something important. This video is a deep exploration of historical, traditional, and ethnobotanical knowledge passed down through generations of agrarian communities, including the Amish. The information shared here about any plants with medicinal properties reflects traditional folk uses and emerging scientific research, and is presented strictly for educational and historical purposes. Nothing in this video should be interpreted as medical advice. If you have a health condition or are considering changes to your diet or lifestyle, please consult a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions. That said, the scientific community has been quietly catching up to what these ancient communities already knew, and the clinical data coming out of leading universities is nothing short of remarkable. Now, here is why you absolutely cannot click away. We are going to walk through 15 perennial crops that the Amish and other traditional farming communities have relied on for centuries. Plants that you put in the ground once and harvest essentially forever. But I need you to stay with me all the way through this list, because item number 8 was so effective at what it does that major agricultural lobbying groups spent decades trying to push it out of mainstream gardening culture. And the story behind why is genuinely infuriating. And the final plant on this list, number 15, is what the old Amish farmers called their ultimate insurance policy, the one crop they would protect above all others if everything else failed. You do not want to miss that. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because we post new videos every week connecting ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. Let's get into it. Number 1, asparagus, the crown jewel of the perennial garden. There is an old saying among Amish farming families that goes something like this: the man who plants asparagus is planting for his grandchildren, and that is not poetry, that is agricultural fact. An asparagus crown, properly planted, will produce vigorous, harvestable spears for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years from the same root system. The Amish understood something that modern gardeners have almost entirely forgotten, which is that asparagus is not a vegetable you plant for this season. It is an investment you make in the land itself. Traditional Amish growers would dedicate entire permanent beds to asparagus, amending the soil deeply with composted manure and wood ash, and then exercising the radical patience of allowing the crowns to establish for 2 full years before taking a single spear. That patience was rewarded with decades of effortless abundance. Modern science has since confirmed why asparagus is so extraordinary. The plant is loaded with compounds called saponins, particularly asparasapones, which have been studied for their prebiotic effects on gut microbiota. It is also one of the richest dietary sources of glutathione, often called the master antioxidant, a molecule your liver uses to neutralize and eliminate toxic compounds from the body. And asparagus is one of the most concentrated natural sources of folate available in any garden plant. The seed industry would rather sell you annual vegetables you replant every spring. Asparagus asks you to be patient once, and then it feeds you for a lifetime. Dig a trench 18 inches deep, amend it heavily with organic matter, plant your crowns, and walk away. In year 3, your breakfast table changes forever. Number 2, rhubarb, the ancient sour medicine the industry buried. Long before it ever appeared in a pie, rhubarb was medicine. The dried root of Rheum palmatum, a close botanical cousin to the garden rhubarb most Americans recognize, appears in Chinese pharmacopoeias dating back over 4,000 years, where it was prescribed for digestive complaints, inflammation, and as a powerful cleansing agent for the liver and colon. The Amish brought this plant to American soil and treated it with the same reverence their European ancestors had for generations. In traditional Amish homesteads, rhubarb crowns were among the first things planted when a new property was established, often placed near the kitchen garden where their massive, tropical-looking leaves could catch maximum rainfall. A single rhubarb crown will spread and thrive for 15 to 20 years with almost no intervention. Science has caught up in fascinating ways. The stalks of rhubarb contain significant concentrations of anthraquinones, compounds that have been studied extensively for their effects on digestive motility and for their preliminary activity against certain inflammatory pathways. The plant also contains emidin, a compound currently under active research for its potential effects on metabolic function and cellular signaling. The reason rhubarb fell from prominence as a medicinal food has everything to do with the pharmaceutical industry's rise in the 20th century. When synthetic laxatives and digestive drugs became profitable, the traditional knowledge around food-based remedies was quietly allowed to fade. Plant a crown in well-drained soil with full sun in late fall or early spring. Mulch it heavily. Ignore it, return the following year with a basket. Number 3, horseradish, the underground fire they tried to contain. If there is one plant on this entire list that most perfectly embodies the Amish philosophy of controlled, productive defiance, it is horseradish. Once you plant it, the battle is not getting it to grow. The battle is keeping it where you want it. Horseradish spreads aggressively through deep, starchy root systems, and if you give it a corner of your property, it will claim that corner and defend it with extraordinary vigor for the rest of your natural life. Amish families historically planted horseradish on the edges of their properties, near fence lines and outbuildings, where its aggressive nature was an asset rather than a problem. It required nothing, no watering, no fertilizing, no replanting. Year after year, the roots grew thicker, more potent, and more abundant. The science behind horseradish is genuinely stunning. The root contains extraordinarily high concentrations of glucosinolates, sulfur-based compounds that, when the root tissue is damaged by grating or chewing, enzymatically convert into isothiocyanates. These molecules have been the subject of serious oncological research at institutions, including the University of Illinois, where researchers found them to have measurable effects on certain cancer cell lines in laboratory settings. Horseradish is also one of the most potent natural sources of centigrin, a compound studied for its antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. Big agriculture ignored horseradish because you cannot patent it, you cannot make it dependent on proprietary inputs, and you cannot stop it from growing. Plant a single root cutting 6 inches deep in any reasonably fertile soil. Stand back, harvest the roots in fall, grate them fresh, and mix with raw apple cider vinegar for a preparation the Amish called liquid fire. Number 4, comfrey, the miracle healer they made you afraid of. Few plants in the entire history of Western herbalism have been as deliberately misrepresented as comfrey. For centuries, across Europe and then in the New World, comfrey was known by a name that tells you everything about how traditional communities valued it: knitbone. The Amish and the Appalachian farming communities before them used poultices, made from fresh comfrey leaves to address sprains, bruising, joint inflammation, and the kind of deep musculoskeletal pain that comes from a lifetime of hard physical labor. They also used it as a premier soil amendment, cutting the massive leaves and laying them as mulch around fruit trees and vegetable beds where the plant's extraordinary mineral content would slowly release back into the earth. The science behind comfrey centers on a compound called a molecule that has been clinically demonstrated to accelerate the rate of cell proliferation and tissue regeneration. Allantoin is so effective that it has been incorporated into a wide range of pharmaceutical and cosmetic preparations, where it is listed as an active ingredient in products marketed for wound healing and skin regeneration. Comfrey also contains rosmarinic acid, a powerful anti-inflammatory polyphenol with significant antioxidant capacity. The controversy around Comfrey involves pyrrolizidine alkaloids in the leaves, which in large internal doses carry documented liver risks. Traditional use was predominantly external, and the root form of supplementation is where caution is most warranted. Plant comfrey once in a moist, partially shaded location, and it will return, spreading slowly every year for the rest of your life. Number 5. Garlic, the ancient healer that outlived every empire that tried to ignore it. Garlic holds a position in the history of human civilization that no other plant can claim. It appears in the Egyptian Ebers papyrus from 1550 BCE as a treatment for at least 22 distinct ailments. It was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Greek athletes consumed it before competition. Roman soldiers ate it for stamina and to prevent wound infection in the field. And for the Amish, garlic was not a culinary ingredient. It was foundational medicine, planted every autumn in precise rows, harvested the following midsummer, and braided into long ropes that hung in every Amish kitchen throughout the winter months. Available at all times as both food and pharmacy, Amish healers called it the antibiotic that God put in the ground. Modern pharmacology has given that claim extraordinary weight. Garlic's primary active compound is allicin, produced when the clove is crushed or chopped, and the enzyme allinase converts alliin into this remarkable sulfur molecule. Allicin has been demonstrated in peer-reviewed clinical research to exhibit broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity against bacteria, fungi, and certain viral pathogens. A landmark meta-analysis published in the Journal of Nutrition found that regular garlic consumption was associated with statistically significant reductions in systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Additional research has documented garlic's effects on LDL oxidation, platelet aggregation, and arterial elasticity. Plant cloves in October, pointy side up, 2 inches deep and 6 inches apart. Harvest when the lower half of the leaves have browned the following July. Cure in a dry ventilated space for 3 weeks. Save your largest bulbs for replanting. Number 6. Jerusalem artichoke, the forgotten staple that fed a continent before corn took over, before European settlers ever introduced maize to the northeastern woodlands of North America. Indigenous communities across this continent had already discovered one of the most productive and effortless food plants ever to grow from American soil. The Jerusalem artichoke, which is not an artichoke at all and has absolutely nothing to do with Jerusalem, is a native North American perennial sunflower whose underground tubers produce an extraordinary caloric yield from ground that most other crops would refuse entirely. The Amish adopted it early and kept it faithfully, planting it once along field edges and fence rows where it would return every single year. Spreading slowly outward, requiring no irrigation, no fertilization, and almost no human attention whatsoever. An established patch of Jerusalem artichokes is essentially unstoppable. The science behind this plant is centered on a remarkable carbohydrate called inulin, a prebiotic fiber that the human digestive system cannot break down directly, but that feeds the beneficial bacterial colonies of the gut microbiome with extraordinary efficiency. Research published in journals focused on metabolic health has documented inulin's measurable effects on insulin sensitivity and blood glucose regulation, making Jerusalem artichoke one of the most genuinely interesting foods for anyone monitoring metabolic function. The tubers can be eaten raw, roasted, or fermented into a probiotic preparation. The old Amish homesteaders simply called root pickle. Plant a single tuber in any sunny location with loose soil in spring. Return in October. Harvest what you need. Leave the rest in the ground. They will multiply and return next year without a single additional action from you. Number 7. Lovage, the lost herb of the medieval monastery garden. Walk through the remnants of any historically preserved European monastery garden, from the Benedictine herb plots of Bavaria to the preserved physic gardens of English abbeys, and you will almost certainly find lovage still growing exactly where monks planted it centuries ago. This towering celery-scented perennial herb was considered so essential to traditional European cooking and medicine that it was one of the first cultivated plants transported by religious orders as they established new communities across the continent. The Amish brought it to American soil as part of their broader tradition of preserving the complete pharmacopoeia of their Swiss and German ancestors. And it became a fixture of the traditional Amish kitchen garden, used as a culinary herb, a digestive tonic, and a poultice for joint inflammation. Every part of the plant, the leaves, the stems, the seeds, and the roots, carries potent medicinal and culinary value. Modern phytochemical analysis has identified lovage as a significant source of phthalates, the same class of bioactive compounds found in celery and its relatives, which have been studied for their effects on vascular smooth muscle relaxation and blood pressure modulation. Lovage also contains high concentrations of quercetin, one of the most extensively studied dietary flavonoids in contemporary nutritional science, with documented antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and antihistamine activity in peer-reviewed research. The reason lovage disappeared from the American kitchen has nothing to do with its usefulness and everything to do with the industrialization of flavor, which reduced the acceptable palette of herbs to a handful of commercially scalable options. Plant lovage once in deep, moist, fertile soil with partial shade in afternoon. It will grow to 6 feet tall, return every spring for 20 years, and ask nothing of you in return. Number 8. Stinging nettle. The plant so effective that industry spent decades making you afraid to touch it. Here is the item I promised you at the beginning of this video. The plant that was so nutritionally and medicinally potent that it became inconvenient for multiple industries simultaneously. Stinging nettle Urtica dioica is arguably the single most nutritionally dense leafy green that any temperate climate gardener could possibly grow. And the fact that most Americans consider it nothing more than a painful weed to be avoided is one of the greatest and most deliberate acts of nutritional miseducation in modern agricultural history. Nettle leaves contain measurable quantities of iron, calcium, magnesium, potassium, vitamins A, C, and K, along with a protein content that rivals many cultivated leafy vegetables. The Amish and the broader Pennsylvania Dutch farming tradition used nettle in ways that would fill an entire separate video. Spring nettle soup was a seasonal ritual made from the tender first growth of the year and consumed as what the old-timers called a blood cleanser after the heavy preserved food diet of winter. Nettle was brewed into a mineral-rich tea and given to pregnant women, nursing mothers, and anyone recovering from illness or physical injury. Dried nettle leaves were packed around root vegetables in the cold cellar to discourage mold and pests. Fermented nettle liquid was used as a supreme natural fertilizer for the kitchen garden, a practice that modern permaculture has enthusiastically rediscovered. The scientific literature on nettle is extensive and continues to grow. Research published in journals of phytomedicine has documented nettle root extract's significant effects on the hormonal pathway involving sex hormone-binding globulin, making it one of the most studied natural compounds in the area of prostate health and hormonal balance in aging men. Nettle leaf extracts have shown measurable anti-inflammatory activity in studies examining prostaglandin synthesis pathways, with one notable double-blind trial finding it comparable to certain non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in the management of osteoarthritic pain. The iron in nettle is accompanied by vitamin C in the fresh plant, which dramatically enhances non-heme iron bioavailability, making it a genuinely effective food intervention for iron deficiency conditions. The herbicide industry profits from nettle's status as a weed to be killed. The pharmaceutical industry profits from you not knowing that a free plant growing in your fence line has documented effects on conditions for which they sell expensive medications. Plant nettle in a contained raised bed or along a moist semi-shaded fence line. Wear gloves at harvest and blanch the leaves immediately to neutralize the sting. What you are left with is a dark, deeply nutritious green that tastes like the most mineral-rich spinach you have ever eaten. Once established, it will return every year and spread slowly and quietly, asking only that you finally treat it with the respect it has always deserved. Before we continue, I want to ask you something directly. If this information is opening your eyes to what has been quietly available to you all along, take 10 seconds right now and leave a comment below with the word Perennial. It tells me that this kind of deep ancestral knowledge is exactly what you came to this channel for, and it helps more people just like you find this video. Let's keep going. Number 9. The sour green that healed the winters of the old world. There is a reason why French country cooking never abandoned sorrel, why Russian peasant households kept it in every kitchen garden for centuries, and why Amish grandmothers in Lancaster County still consider it one of the first signs of spring worth celebrating. Sorrel is a perennial leafy green that emerges from the frozen ground earlier than almost any other edible plant, sometimes pushing through soil while frost is still forming overnight on nearby surfaces. For communities who survived on root vegetables, preserved meats, and dried legumes through the long months of winter, that first flush of bright, sour, vitamin-rich sorrel leaves in early spring was not just food, it was medicine arriving exactly when the body needed it most. The Amish used sorrel in soups, in egg dishes, and as a fresh-eating green. And they understood from generations of observation that the people who ate it in early spring got sick less, recovered faster, and had more vitality entering the planting season. Modern nutritional science explains why, with elegant clarity, sorrel is extraordinarily rich in vitamin C, containing levels that compare favorably with citrus fruits. And it delivers this vitamin in early spring precisely when it has been absent from the diet for the longest period. It is also a significant source of oxalic acid, which in moderation acts as a natural preservative and flavoring agent, along with flavonoids, including vitexin and orientin, which have been studied for their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. The leaves contain notable quantities of lutein and zeaxanthin, the carotenoid compounds most associated with long-term macular health and vision preservation. Sorrel disappeared from the American mainstream garden, not because it failed anyone, but because the commercial produce industry had no way to scale, ship, and profit from a perennial green that grows for free in anyone's backyard. Plant sorrel crowns or seeds in early spring in any average garden soil. It will grow quickly, establish a permanent root system over its first season, and return every year for decades. Harvest the young leaves continuously throughout spring and fall for the most tender, least acidic flavor. Cut it back hard in summer heat, and it will reward you with a fresh flush of growth when temperatures drop again in September. Number 10. Elderberry, the antiviral fortress that every Amish family kept in their back field. If you were to walk the property lines of traditional Amish farms in Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, and ask the oldest members of those communities to point out the most important medicinal plant on their land, a substantial number of them would walk you directly to the elder tree. Sambucus nigra, the black elderberry, occupies a place in the Amish pharmacopoeia that can only be described as irreplaceable. Every autumn, when the heavy clusters of deep purple-black berries bent the branches of the elder trees at the edge of the fields, the entire family would turn out to harvest them. The berries were cooked down with raw honey and spices into a thick, dark syrup that was bottled and stored in the cold cellar, ready to be administered at the first sign of any respiratory illness throughout the winter months. The flowers were dried for tea, the inner bark was carefully prepared for its own distinct applications, and nothing from the plant was wasted. This was not superstition. This was centuries of empirical observation, producing one of the most pharmacologically validated folk remedies in the entire ethnobotanical record. The scientific literature on elderberry is now substantial and continues to expand. A randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, published in the journal Nutrients, found that elderberry supplementation significantly reduced both the duration and the severity of influenza symptoms in otherwise healthy adults. The mechanism is understood to involve anthocyanins, the deep purple pigment compounds that give the berry its extraordinary color, which have been demonstrated to bind directly to viral surface proteins and inhibit the virus's ability to enter and replicate within host cells. Elderberry also contains significant quantities of quercetin, rutin, and chlorogenic acid, all of which contribute to its measurable anti-inflammatory and antioxidant activity. Research from the University of Sydney demonstrated that elderberry compounds could directly inhibit the early stages of an influenza infection, as well as prevent the virus from propagating in the late-stage infection cycle. The pharmaceutical industry's response to elderberry's rise in popularity has been instructive. Rather than acknowledge its efficacy, the standard response has been to fund research looking specifically for contraindications and to amplify uncertainty. In the popular press around its use, plant elderberry in full sun with moist, slightly acidic soil. It establishes quickly, grows vigorously, and within 2 to 3 years will produce enough berries annually to supply a serious home medicine cabinet with elderberry. Syrup for the entire cold and flu season. Plant at least 2 cultivars near each other for optimal cross-pollination and berry yield. The elder does not ask much from you, But what it gives back, year after year after year, is extraordinary. Number 11. Turkish rocket, the forgotten perennial green that fed entire villages through famine. Most American gardeners have never heard this name, and that ignorance is not accidental. Turkish rocket, known botanically as Bunaeas orientalis, is a robust, deeply rooted perennial green that has been cultivated across the steppes of Central Asia, the Caucasus Mountains, and Eastern Europe for so long that its exact origin has been lost to history. What is not lost is the record of what it meant to the communities that depended on it. During the great famines that periodically swept across Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Turkish rocket was frequently the plant that kept entire villages alive, because it grows with a persistence and a vigor that almost nothing in the kitchen garden can match. It emerges in earliest spring, often before the last frost has fully released its grip on the soil, producing tender, dark green leaves with a flavor profile that sits somewhere between arugula and mustard. Deeply satisfying, slightly bitter, and rich with the mineral density that only a deep perennial root system can draw from the earth. The Amish encountered this plant through their broader German and Eastern European agricultural network, and it became part of the perennial edge plantings that characterized the most productive traditional homesteads. A single plant will grow into a substantial clump over its first 2 seasons and then produce tender greens, from very early spring through late autumn with almost no intervention required. The nutritional science behind Turkish rocket is still being fully characterized. But what researchers have identified is compelling. The leaves contain high concentrations of glucosinolates, the same family of sulfur-containing compounds found in broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and horseradish, which enzymatically produce isothiocyanates, and indo compounds that have been the subject of serious research in the areas of cellular detoxification and inflammatory pathway modulation. Turkish rocket is also a significant source of vitamin C, beta-carotene, and a range of B vitamins. Delivered in a package that grows itself year after year in even poor, compacted, or neglected soil. The seed industry has no product to sell you here. The fertilizer companies have nothing to offer this plant. And that, more than anything else, explains why you have never seen it on the shelf of your local garden center. Plant seeds or bare root divisions in any sunny to partially shaded location, with average to poor soil. Water it through its first season to help it establish. From year 2 onward, treat it as a permanent, self-maintaining source of early spring nutrition that will outlive your garden beds, your raised planters, and quite possibly your grandchildren's first vegetable gardens. Now, I want to take a moment here, and I want to ask you to do something that takes less than 2 seconds. If you have made it this far into this video, it means something. It means you are not the kind of person who is satisfied with the shallow, the convenient, or the deliberately simplified version of the world that most media is designed to keep you inside. You came here because some part of you already knew that the answers have always been closer than the system wanted you to believe, that the earth beneath your feet, tended with patience and wisdom, has always been capable of providing more than any supermarket shelf or pharmaceutical counter. If that resonates with you, if these revelations are shifting the way you see your land, your health, and your self-reliance, please take this moment to press the like button on this video. It is a small gesture that carries real meaning, because it tells the algorithm that this kind of deep, ancient, important knowledge deserves to reach more people. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the time. Every week, we go deeper into the archives of ancestral wisdom, and the next video we have coming will change the way you think about your medicine cabinet forever. Now let's continue, because the plants we are about to cover are among the most important on this entire list. Number 12. Ostrich fern. The ancient forest food that grows where almost nothing else will. There are corners of every property that gardeners quietly give up on. The deep shade beneath mature trees where grass refuses to establish, the low-lying wet areas. Near drainage ditches where most vegetables simply rot. The north-facing slopes that never see enough direct sun to justify the effort of cultivation. The Amish did not give up on those corners. They planted ostrich ferns. Matucha struthiopteris is a native North American perennial fern that produces what are known as fiddleheads, the tightly coiled, bright green emerging fronds of early spring, which have been harvested and eaten by indigenous communities across the northeastern woodlands of this continent for thousands of years before European contact. In traditional Amish and broader Appalachian homestead culture, Ostrich ferns were deliberately established in those difficult, shaded, moist areas of the property that could not support conventional crops, turning dead space into productive food-growing ground. A single established fern crown will spread slowly through underground rhizomes into a productive colony over several years, and once established, it is essentially permanent. Fiddleheads emerge for a brief but abundantly productive window in early spring, typically 2 to 3 weeks, and must be harvested when still tightly coiled before the frond begins to unfurl. The nutritional profile of fiddleheads is genuinely remarkable for a wild food. Research has documented significant concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids in fiddlehead tissue, which is highly unusual for a leafy plant and reflects the rich, complex soil ecology of the forest environments these ferns evolved within. They are also a concentrated source of vitamins A and C, manganese, and a range of antioxidant compounds including shikimic acid, which has attracted serious pharmaceutical interest as a precursor compound in the synthesis of antiviral medications. The ostrich fern asks only one thing of you: give it shade, give it moisture, and leave it alone. In return, it will transform the most neglected corners of your property into some of the most productive and ecologically valuable ground you own, and it will do so silently and faithfully for as long as you allow it to grow. Number 13. Sea kale. The coastal perennial that aristocrats guarded and peasants forgot. There is a fascinating and somewhat uncomfortable history behind sea kale, Cranby meridema, that perfectly illustrates how traditional food knowledge has been suppressed and hoarded across human history. For centuries, coastal communities along the shores of Western Europe harvested wild sea kale directly from the shingle beaches and rocky shorelines where it grew naturally, blanching the tender spring shoots and eating them as one of the first fresh vegetables available after the long northern European winter. When 18th century English horticulturalists discovered that sea kale could be cultivated in kitchen gardens and forced under pots in winter to produce extraordinarily tender white sweet shoots nearly year-round, it rapidly became fashionable among the aristocracy and the wealthy classes. Estate gardens maintained elaborate sea kale forcing operations. The plant became, in the most literal sense, a food of privilege. And when fashions changed, when the aristocratic kitchen garden gave way to the industrial food supply, the knowledge of sea kale cultivation largely vanished from common use, leaving behind only a handful of dedicated heritage gardeners and the wild coastal populations clinging to their original beaches. The Amish preserved a version of this knowledge through their broader connection to European heritage gardening traditions, and sea kale appears in the records of several 19th century Pennsylvania Dutch kitchen gardens as a prized perennial vegetable. Sea kale is a member of the Brassica family, and like its relatives, it contains significant concentrations of glucosinolates and their isothiocyanate breakdown products, which have been the subject of substantial research in the areas of cellular defense mechanisms and inflammatory regulation. The forced, blanched shoots are among the most tender and sweet of any Brassica product, with a flavor frequently compared to a cross between asparagus and cauliflower, without even a trace of the bitterness that characterizes most Brassica greens. Plant sea kale root cuttings called thongs in early spring in deep sandy, free-draining soil with full sun exposure. The plant establishes slowly in its first season, but becomes increasingly vigorous and productive from year 2 onward. In late winter, place a large pot or forcing jar over the emerging crown to blanch the shoots in darkness. Harvest them at 6 to 8 inches tall. What you will put on your plate is something that kings and lords once considered a delicacy worth protecting behind estate walls. And it will come back from the same crown every single year for the rest of your life. Number 14. Groundnut, the perennial protein engine that sustained a civilization before it was erased. Apios americana goes by many names. Hopness was what the Lenape people called it. The early pilgrims, who survived their first catastrophic American winters, largely because indigenous communities showed them where to find it, called it the groundnut. And the Amish, who learned from the land in the same patient, observational way that all traditional agricultural communities learn, came to understand it as one of the most valuable perennial food plants in the entire eastern North American ecosystem. Groundnut is a nitrogen-fixing perennial vine that produces strings of underground tubers roughly the size and shape of small potatoes, with a nutty, starchy flavor and a protein content that is approximately 3 times higher than that of the conventional potato. Read that again. 3 times the protein of a potato, from a plant that fixes its own nitrogen, requires no annual replanting, and grows vigorously in partially shaded woodland edges and moist lowland areas that conventional crops cannot utilize. The science behind groundnut's nutritional profile confirms what generations of indigenous and Amish farmers observed empirically. The tubers contain significant quantities of isoflavones, including specific compounds that are currently under investigation for their effects on hormonal balance and bone density preservation in aging populations. The plant's nitrogen-fixing capacity, enabled through a symbiotic relationship with soil bacteria of the Bradyrhizobium genus, means that it actively improves soil fertility as it grows, leaving the ground richer for every other plant in its vicinity. The reason groundnut disappeared from the American agricultural mainstream is a story of colonial erasure followed by industrial consolidation. The potato, which was easier to harvest mechanically at commercial scale, was promoted aggressively by agricultural interests. The superior native perennial protein source was simply left behind. Plant groundnut tubers in moist, partially shaded soil in spring. Establish them near a trellis, a fence, or any woody structure they can climb. Allow the colony to establish over 2 full seasons before beginning your harvest. In year 3, you will be pulling handfuls of protein-rich tubers from soil that is simultaneously being enriched by the very plant feeding you. That is the closed loop that the Amish always understood. That is what the industrial food system was never designed to offer you. Number 15. Walking onion. The ultimate insurance policy of the Amish homestead. I promised you at the beginning of this video that the final plant on this list was the one that old Amish farmers called their ultimate insurance policy, the one crop they would protect above all others if everything else failed. And I want you to understand why that statement is not hyperbole before I explain what this plant actually is. In the philosophy of traditional Amish farming, true food security was never measured by the size of the harvest in a good year. It was measured by what you still had in a catastrophic year. When the frost came late, when the rains failed, when disease swept through the annual vegetable beds and left entire families staring at empty garden rows in August, there was one plant that had never, in living memory, failed to produce. The Egyptian walking onion, known botanically as Allium proliferum, is perhaps the most self-sufficient food plant ever to exist in a temperate climate garden. It is called a walking onion because of its extraordinary and almost otherworldly reproductive strategy. Instead of producing flowers and seeds at the top of its stalk, like conventional onions, the walking onion produces a cluster of small bulbils, miniature onion sets, at the very tip of each stem. These bulbils grow heavy as the season progresses, bending the stems slowly toward the ground under their own weight, until the tip touches the soil and the bulbils take root exactly where they land. The plant moves across your garden of its own accord, planting itself, establishing new colonies, expanding its territory in a slow and deliberate march that requires absolutely nothing from you. An Amish family that established a walking onion bed in one corner of their kitchen garden in 1880 could reasonably expect their great-grandchildren to still be harvesting from the descendants of those original plants today. That is not a metaphor. That is the biological reality of this plant. Every part of the walking onion is edible and useful across every season of the year. The green tops can be harvested like scallions from very early spring through late autumn. The underground bulbs can be dug like small shallots and used in cooking or preserved in apple cider vinegar. The aerial bulbils themselves can be eaten raw, pickled, roasted, or replanted, and they remain viable for months after harvest, stored in a cool, dry location. Traditional Amish healers used walking onion preparations in many of the same ways they used garlic, as a broad-spectrum antimicrobial, a circulatory tonic, and a respiratory support during winter illness. The science behind alliums as a category is among the most robust in the entire field of food pharmacology. Walking onions contain thiosulfonate compounds and organosulfur molecules, closely related to those found in garlic and conventional onions, which have been documented in peer-reviewed research to exhibit antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and cardiovascular protective activity. They are a meaningful source of quercetin, one of the most bioavailable dietary flavonoids, along with kaempferol and a range of sulfur-containing amino acid precursors that support the body's endogenous antioxidant systems. The prebiotic fructoolig acid content of the bulbs feeds beneficial gut bacteria in ways that parallel the effects of other allium family members studied in microbiome research. The industrial food system never needed the walking onion because the walking onion needed nothing from the industrial food system. You cannot sell inputs to a plant that walks itself across your garden and plants itself. You cannot create dependency around a crop that multiplies freely, requires no chemical support, and provides food across every season of the growing year. Plant a single cluster of walking onion bulbils in any average garden soil in either spring or fall. Water them through their first establishment period. Then step back and watch the most quietly extraordinary performance in the plant. Kingdom unfold across your garden beds over the coming years. Mark the bed, protect it. Tell your children what it is and why it matters. Because the walking onion is not just a food plant. It is a living, moving, self-replicating embodiment of the philosophy that every single plant on this list represents. The philosophy that says true abundance does not come from buying more. It comes from understanding what the earth already knows how to do. And now I need to fulfill a promise I made to you at the very beginning of this video. I told you that item number 8, stinging nettle, was so effective that the industry spent decades making you afraid to touch it. And I told you that the final plant on this list was the Amish farmer's ultimate insurance policy. You have now seen both. But here is the deeper truth that I want you to sit with as this video ends. Every single one of these 15 plants shares one fundamental characteristic that goes beyond their nutritional profiles, beyond their medicinal compounds, beyond their yields and their flavors and their histories. Every single one of them was designed by nature to persist, to return, to provide, season after season, without asking permission and without requiring your constant intervention. The Amish did not invent this system. They preserved it. They carried it forward through generations of deliberate, patient, humble observation of how the natural world actually works when human beings stop trying to dominate it and start trying to understand it instead. And what they understood, what every traditional agrarian culture on every continent understood before the Industrial Revolution severed, that knowledge chain is something profoundly simple. The earth wants to feed you. It has always wanted to feed you. The only question that has ever mattered is whether you are willing to work with it on its own terms, to plant with patience, to observe with humility, and to trust that what your great-grandparents knew about the soil beneath their feet was not primitive superstition, but accumulated wisdom of the deepest and most reliable kind. The 15 plants in this video are not a gardening trend. They are not a lifestyle aesthetic. They are a doorway back to a relationship with the land that the modern world spent 100 years trying to convince you was obsolete. It was never obsolete. It was inconvenient for the people selling you what you no longer needed once you understood it. Now you understand it. And that knowledge, unlike the annual crops that die with the first frost, is itself a perennial. It will come back. It will grow stronger. It will feed everything else you choose to build on it. I want to end this video with a question for you, and I genuinely want to read your answer in the comments below. Of these 15 perennial crops, which one are you going to plant first this season, and why? Tell me the plant, tell me your reason, and tell me where you are writing from. Because this community spans every climate zone, every continent, and every kind of land. And the collective knowledge in these comments is itself a form of ancestral wisdom being built in real time. Leave your answer below. Share this video with one person in your life who you know is trying to build something real on their land. And we will see you in the next one, where the archive goes even deeper. The vault is never empty.